Welcome in, everyone. How's everyone doing today? It's Science Sunday. Today, we're gonna do engines. Not all engines, and not all types of engines. Today is I want to say probably the first part, maybe like two parts. Probably two parts, because there's a lot of different, layered topics under engines. So today, we're covering a very, very old engine called the Aeola Pile, hot air engines, and low pressure steam engines. That's what we have on the schedule. I am going to make sure that this actually does what it's supposed to. Is the music a little loud? I don't know. I guess it's loud in my ears because I have my headphones turned up. Um, all right. Put this there and there. Okay, first. What is an engine? Like, it seems simple, but there's a couple of different definitions, and that'll change what you consider an engine, what what you count as an engine, and what I guess, and what, for example, pumps. Is a pump an engine? There's a couple different definitions. So you have paint. You have engines. What is an engine? Well, you could say an engine is a device. Oh my god. Device that does work. You'd call this an engine. Okay. So a device that does work. Well, what is work? Work is basically the physics term for like not producing energy, because you can't make energy, but taking energy or harnessing energy energy to do work. Work is measured in joules, which is spelled. Shit, actually, I don't know how this spelled. How is that spelled? Joules. Oh, it's an O-U-L. Never mind. O-U-L-E-S. Joules. Energy. So you could call that an engine. But then what is a pump versus engine? Are they the same? Are they different? You can say pump moves something from point A to point B. For example, that could be air, air, water, heat, etc. Whereas an engine an engine harnesses energy. So both of them harness energy to add to an engine is like anything else. Like, for example, an engine could add to a stockpile of energy, or, for example, move a car. That would be, you could call that an engine, because even though the engine is moving the car from point A to point B, that's not what we're talking about. For example, like a pump. Like, you might not call that a pump because it's not taking, like, its primary purpose is not to take some air from here to there. That's not what a car engine does. A car engine uses air. There's air, and air does go from point A to point B, but it uses it to add to, like, the what's it called? The rotational momentum of the wheels or the axles, whatever you want to call them. What does this actually mean? It's complicated. Like a pump. Basically, it comes down to what the primary purpose is. A pump moves some fluid or energy A to B. An engine, you could say, is basically anything else. Something that's designed to, instead of moving, for example, water from like inside of a mine to outside of the mine, an engine might just be harnessing energy for some purpose. It doesn't specifically do anything with that energy. That's not what it's designed to do. It's designed to just get the energy. So this just harnesses energy. G. For some. What purpose? That wouldn't be decided by the engine. The engine just adds energy to whatever stockpile you have. Then you can take that energy and do stuff with it. Point is, these terms will oftentimes be used interchangeably. For example, because there's not really a science definition. Sometimes things that you would call a pump will be called engines, and sometimes things that you would call an engine might be a pump. It depends. So, right? Engine harnesses energy to do some work. We're going to start with our first engine. First engine is called an aeolipile. Or Heron's engine. Because the Heron, or sometimes you'll see this spelled hero, because, like, sometimes you'll see people say that he invented the engine, and from what I've seen, we don't think he invented the engine. He was just the first to describe it in, like, detail and how it was produced. Okay. Also, there's a lot of spellings for this one. Let me write the other ones down. You have Aeolipile or Eolipile. Because it's ancient Greek, there's not necessarily one spelling, which is great, because then you have to search for all of them to find information. First, we're going to go over some history. We'll explain why we don't think Heron actually invented the engine. Then, I have some resources. I have an animation that helpfully makes it clearer, like, what it actually is. Okay. So let me change the music. There we go. Cool. So you have hero of Alexandria. When I learned about this, I always I learned it Heron of Alexandria. Again, ancient Greek, the spelling is not super easy to translate into English or Latin characters. He is a Greek Egyptian engineer. He lived, we think, somewhere like 30 to 75 AD. And he is credited with the invention of the I always have to look at how to spell this. It's always confusing. Aeolipile. So while generally we know very little about him, his life just in general. He is credited with this because he described its construction in his work. Pneumatica. There we go. Pneumatica. Basically that's like of pneumatics, of air, fluids, roughly, that you could translate that. So this is why he's credited with the invention, because he was the first to describe how it was actually made. However, Actually, I'll just put this up to the side. However, Vitruvius, who was a Roman architect, about like 30 to 20 BC. He mentioned a device very much similar, or he mentioned this thing called the Aeolipile, which we pretty sure is just the same thing. Mentioned Aeolipile. There. That's incomplete. That's whatever. He said that they are vessels filled with water heated over a fire, and at first little wind is emitted. That's, I believe, a direct quote. Like, when it's first heated up, it doesn't do very much. But when the water starts to boil, a violent wind issues forth. And this was in his work, De Architectura of Architecture. So he mentions a device that is basically the same as what Hero of Alexandria described. And although this isn't confirmed, there's a theory that a different engineer Archytas, ancient Greek mathematician. Hopefully that's legible. I'm sorry if it's not. But he was very, like, prominent in this kind of pneumatics, pressure, air field. He made a bird. Bird in quotes. A bird that was propelled by steam and obviously we don't know, but apparently from, like, documents and stuff, it flew up to 200 meters. If that is true, That's crazy. But because of this, and actually here, let me show you what I have for him. We have resources. There is his bird. You can see it has this. It's like a bird shape, and then it has this ball at the end with a nozzle. The bird and the ball would be filled with hot steam, and then you would just let it go, and it would fly itself through the air. In apparently up to 200 meters. So, again, we can't prove most of this. It's all just gathering evidence from documents over 2,000 years old. But because he was so prominent in that space, we think that maybe he was the one who invented it. But maybe not. There are other, like, inventors and engineers that also lived during that time and also worked with these concepts. So, I don't know. That's just something I saw while I was researching for this. Okay. Right, because Vitruvius mentioned it before Heron was even born, then, or before we think Heron was born, Heron probably didn't invent it, but he did describe it first, and he described it in very detailed how to construct it. Though, to be fair, it's not, like, an incredibly complicated machine. Okay, so a description. It is a bladeless bladeless reactionary steam engine. Right, it doesn't have blades. I think that's pretty obvious what that means. Reactionary means that, so if I have, let's say, a thing here, it blows air out this end, it would move this way. That's called the reactionary principle, or Newton's third law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And that is basically all you need to know. Except that it did spin. That's what it did. It was a you have your orb. I will show you a much better diagram later, but it did like spin in like a circle and stuff. But the spin is very weak. It doesn't actually produce that much energy. It just spins really fast. Like, for example, some of them, like really, like well-built ones, can get up to 6,000 RPM, but like you touch it with your finger and it just instantly stops in its tracks. That's just because of the way that they're built. They don't actually harness that much energy. They more so carry their momentum forward. They build up momentum and they just keep carrying that forward into the next and next like spin. So you can call it an engine in the sense that it does like harness energy to do work. It's just it can't be used for anything practical. Okay. We have ads in a minute, so I will show this. This is what it looked like, more or less. You have your ball that would be filled with steam, or filled with water. You have a fire to heat up the water into steam. You have something to the hold the ball above the fire and hold it in place. There would be like a rod going through the ball here so that it would actually spin instead of move. And then you have these two bent pipes that would direct the steam backwards. And this is why we call it reactionary, because it pushes steam one way and it goes the other way. So, in the very simplistic manner, you could call it a reactionary engine. Right? It just spins. Some of them get up to like 6,000 is what I've seen. Like some of the more modern ones. Which is a lot, but they don't actually, right? Like I said, they don't actually have that much force behind them. Even though they can get up to that speed, they don't actually. They can't do very much with that. Also, we have an ad break in a little bit, so we're gonna pause for a second. Oh, okay. Well, we'll see. Come on. You said there was ads, and now it's just nothing? Okay. Well, ads will come in just a second. Right, obviously, so it's a sphere. It has bent pipes. The bent pipes direct the steam, and then it's kept over a water, and then it has, like, a pole through it to provide, like, an axis of rotation. And there we go, there's the ads. So I will work on drawing something so maybe it helps. Welcome back, everyone. How's everyone doing? Is ads? What the fuck? I probably needed more sleep. That was probably a good idea. Oh well. Hopefully ads were fine. We might have to get caffeine midstream. I didn't have any caffeine today. That's probably part of the problem. Right. We have a little drawing. You can probably see everything from the animation. But basically, you have the water heats up into steam. The pressure inside of this sphere increases, so a bunch of steam has to leave. There was because of how because most of it would be steam, you wouldn't normally risk water leaving through these pipes, but I mean sometimes it did happen. I've seen people do it so that where is it? Circle. So that the water is, or like the rod going through it is here, and then you have pipes like here that point like forward, and then here that point backwards. So that it spins up, it spins like in a circle without risking the water leaving through the pipes. But we're going to use this because, this diagram, because it's simpler. Not bad. Right. The steam leaves here. Then because Newton's third law, it pushes this side this way and this side this way. Because there's a like a pole going through it like there, it'll spin in a circle. That makes sense. Apparently this has a name. It's called like the rocket principle, which sounds a lot cooler than just Newton's third law, I guess. But yeah, so that it pushes steam out, and so it propels itself. I don't know why I wrote more than like a sentence for that, but that's the physics behind that. Now, uses. What was this used for? Nothing. Well, kinda. As far as we know, it wasn't used for any like actual, like I said, movement or harnessing energy, because it produces so little torque. It can't torque. Torque is like force, but in a circle. So like if you have, where you can have your speed, but if your object is really like, okay, it doesn't quite work the same. It gets to move very fast, but without a lot of torque. It can't push anything in a circle, so it can't be used for anything. A lot of the things that Hero published, or Heron, he published a lot of just kind of what he called temple wonders, which were more or less just fascinating inventions that he would put in a temple, because I believe he designed a lot of like work around temples. He also, as far as we know, worked on and invented a pneumatic door opening. Steam pushes this way, and the door, it pushes. I don't exactly know how it actually worked. It was something about like the steam pulls on kind of like rope, which would open the door. But I couldn't find very much about that. So instead, we get to talk about the Aeolipile. Vitruvius said that it. Right, he was a guy with the. He was the architect, Vitruvius. It can be used to demonstrate. Spelling. Demonstrate the great operations of the heavens. That's just weather. Because it uses steam to move. He mentioned that it can be used for teaching people about how weather works. So that's interesting, but besides that, like I said, not used for very much. Cool. That is the Aeolipile. Next, we're going to talk about, that was like, what? At least like 40 BC. So now we're going to jump ahead by a lot to the 1600s. We're going to talk about hot air engines. Before we do this, though, we need to talk about pistons. Right? Piston, theoretically very simple. You have your box. You have this, and this is connected to some kind of wheel. Right, as the wheel spins, the piston moves up and down, right? For example, if the wheel is spinning like this way, then the piston will go down, and it'll slow down, and then make a U-turn and come back up, and it'll move in this kind of like oval shape. Make sense? Pistons require two more things, though. Because they rely on something either pushing this way or pushing this way, these two sides cannot be connected. So they need to maintain a complete seal on either side. Right, if you've seen car pistons, let's see. This one. Car piston. There. Okay. So, car pistons, they're a little bit different, the same concept. This part here would connect to the wheel, or what's it called, the crankshaft, I think. Something like that. This part would connect to the spinning thing that you want to add energy to. This is your piston head. And then these things are called the skirt, the piston skirt. Basically, if you have a box and you want it to fit another box really nicely, It is very hard to make the two boxes fit together perfectly forever because, well, impossible, because the boxes will wear down and they will change shape. So what you do is you add some rubber. Because rubber can expand and contract as necessary, it's squishy, so it can just fill that gap as much as possible. That's what you do in a car piston. Older pistons, they didn't always do that. They needed to form some seal somehow, right? They can't connect. The two sides can't touch. So, in some of the engines we'll talk about, they used, like a lard kind of mixture, or sometimes they used just water, which feels counterintuitive, but air doesn't go through water, so it works. Obviously, those systems require more maintenance, which means they can run for less time without somebody present. Most of those systems, okay, not all of those systems were even like fully automatic all the time. Most of them did become automatic eventually because it's a pain in the ass to have to try and to have someone just pushing or like pulling levers all day. You could, but that wasn't very efficient use of, workers. So most of them became automatic eventually, but that means that someone would need to maintain them every probably like a couple of days, couple of weeks of straight operation. Probably just even like a couple of days. So, anyways, you have your piston, it's connected to your circle. If the circle moves to the right, then the piston gets to be down. I drew that poorly, whatever. The piston is down, and then when we're at the bottom, the piston is all the way down. Yeah, makes sense. The other important thing, because we're working with circles, if I have a piston here, this is piston A. I have a piston attached here, this is piston B, and the circle is rotating this way, you would say this piston is 90 degrees ahead of piston A. And this is 90 degrees behind. The important thing to note is that if the circle decides to spin the other way for whatever reason, this is no longer 90 degrees ahead. Oh my god. This is now 90 degrees behind. Basically, when this piston, right, 90 degrees, makes sense, angles. And because circles, we're working with angles now rather than distances. And secondly, this piston, when this piston is at its peak, this piston will only be halfway up. When this piston is over here, if piston A is here, piston B is at its peak. So if piston A is halfway down, if piston A is halfway down, then piston B is at its peak, right? And that'll be important because a lot of these devices, especially the ones we're going to cover in just a sec, rely on precise timing of moving parts. So, we've covered that. We know pistons work. But how do you push a piston? Well, you can use water. But how do you make the water, right? Because if I have a piston and I push it this way and now it's at its ceiling and can't move anymore, I need to stop pushing the piston or maybe even push it from the other side so that it goes back down. I can't keep pushing the piston and expecting it to add energy. There needs to be some change. So, at the time, water is a lot harder to move than air. But we know how to move air. Hot air expands, and cold air contracts. So we can make the air get bigger and push on something by making it hot. And then we can make the air colder and maybe pull on something by making it cold. Or make it smaller by making it cold, right? So it can pull on stuff. The important bit is that cooling something down... okay, so basically, physics, there is no sucking in physics. This doesn't exist in physics. What you have is, if you have I have a wall, right? Let's say, I have this piston, right? If this is small, this is a vacuum. This is at, let's say, atmosphere. Right, this is just the air. This vacuum is not pulling on this. The atmosphere is pushing on it. And that's the important distinction. So if you wanted a engine that you would compress the air inside or you would cool down the air inside the engine to contract it, you would need to cool the air past atmospheric, at least pressure. There are ways to get it so that you don't have to cool it past atmospheric temperature, but those are more complicated. So you know what's a lot easier? Hot. We can make things hot. Fire. And then, obviously, because if the air is hot, then it can't be, then we need to make it cold again. But we don't need to bring it past atmosphere. We just need to make it cold. The atmosphere can cool stuff. Water can cool stuff. A lot of different ways that you can get this to... that you can get the air to become cold so that you can heat it again and so it can do more work. Okay. So normally, I like to do a history segment because understanding where these engines and where these pieces of technology come from is important to understanding why it is the way it is. There is no history for the hot air engine because it is complicated and people can't agree on stuff, and I really didn't feel like wading through that mess. So we're just going to skip the history and go straight to the basics. What is a hot air engine? Basic principles. There are two parts. You have, what does it do? It is an engine. It converts heat into, or converts not heat, but a heat differential. What that means is if it's 100 degrees here and 20 degrees here, this is a differential. This is a heat differential. So, if both of these are 100 degrees, I can't do anything with either of them. Because of how energy works, you can only harvest energy from a change. And if both of them are at 100 degrees, there is no change. So you need some differential. Converts heat differential into some form of work. To some kind of energy, right? So that's where we get the hot from. And it uses air to do so. It's what's called the transfer medium. Transfer medium. Air is how we're going to take our hot and put it next to the cold so that there is some kind of differential. So we take cold air and we heat it up, so it was cold and now it's hot. That is a change. And then we take our hot air and make it cold. That is also a change. So the other part is that for all engines, you can define a sort of cycle. Which is the steps. The steps / phases an engine goes through to do what it does. Right, that's what a cycle is. You have a bunch of steps and you go through them in order to, in this case, harvest energy. We didn't really talk about this for the Aeolipile because it's essentially a one-step cycle. The air turns into gas and pushes it, or the water turns into steam and pushes it. So you really don't need to define another more steps. So you don't need to really define a cycle, but you can if you wanted to. It's one step. Water becomes steam and it pushes it. So hot air cycles, most hot air cycles look something like this. You have step 1, air stores heat. 2, air is transferred / put in contact of cooler area. 3, cools down and contracts. Right? Like we said, we're going to make use of all of those. We're going to make use of heating and cooling. and then 4 air is transferred to hotter area. This is the general cycle for what are called closed engines, which means that they don't share their air with the outside. Open air engines usually can kind of bypass this step by just transferring into Atmo, and then it can normally skip this by getting air from Atmo. So open air engines, they still follow the same steps. They just don't have to cause the cooling, or they do have to cause the heating, obviously, at least, and they have to at least cause one. They have to cause at least one of these, and the other thing they can just kind of outsource to the atmosphere. Problem with that is that they only work where there is an atmosphere, and if there isn't an atmosphere, then the engine just doesn't work. There we go. But this is your cycle. Oh, right, this expands. Expands. So there are 2 places you can get energy from. You can get energy from here. Energy. You can harvest energy from either place by one of 2 mechanisms, obviously, right? If the air heats up and expands, it can push on a piston, and if the air cools down and contracts, it can, we'll just colloquially, we'll call it sucks in on the piston and pulls it towards the bottom of the piston. So, both of these have energy. Most of the ones we're going to talk about only use this one because they're hot air engines. We will talk about one that uses that also takes advantage of the cool air. So, that is our basics. Now we get into the first one. And yeah, we upgraded. I have a diagram for all of them, I think. Let me grab that. We are... Yep. First one we're going to talk about is called the... Okay, there are many different configurations that you can do this, and there are many different engines. The first engine we're talking about is the Stirling engine. And there are 2 main subcategories. You have your alpha configuration and your beta configuration. There is also a gamma, which is kind of a combination between the 2, is the best way I can describe it, but I didn't have the time didn't really feel like researching it because we're going over 3 hot air engines anyways. Right. Stop. Okay. This is the Stirling Alpha engine. Let me see if we can make it a little bit bigger. This is what it looks like in operation, right? This animation is from Wikipedia. But it's... right? You can always add more complexity to these engines and these diagrams. But this basically shows you what it does. Another thing we're going to point out is that pistons have two strokes usually. You have a power stroke, which, for example, if we look at this piston, the hot piston, we'll call it, the power stroke is when it is expanding, because the air expands. If we look at the cold piston, the power stroke is when the piston comes down. Stirling engines, though, only take advantage of one of the hot air, not the cold air. The cold air is there, it's cool and all, but it doesn't actually use it for, adding to the, momentum of the circle. Okay, right? Basically, construction, I mean, you can see how it's built, more or less. You have your piston, housing. You have your cylinder and another cylinder. Both of them have pistons in them. Then there's a hole at the bottom of each, and they're connected with a tube. Now, the important part is that because we're talking about Stirling engines, the tube they are connected with is called a Stirling regenerator. We'll go over what that means, but that is... see, at the same time, that is what defines a Stirling engine versus other types of engines. But also not all Stirling engines have them, so... yeah. Right? Then one container is heated, one container is cooled somehow. Usually this is just the atmosphere, and these are, heatsink. This one doesn't have to be cooled past atmosphere. This one just has to be colder than this one. And the pistons are connected to a wheel. Now, something that we notice is that the cold piston and the hot piston are connected at the same spot. However, the hot piston is still 90 degrees ahead of the cold piston, because the cold piston is at its minimum right now, right? It's at the bottom of the wheel, and the hot piston is halfway through the wheel. So we would still, even though they're connected at the same spot on the wheel, the hot piston is 90 degrees ahead of the cold piston. And we'll see why this is important when we go through its operation, how it actually functions. First, we're going to explain the Stirling regenerator part, though. Like I said, theoretically, all Stirling engines need to have a Stirling regenerator. Practically not all engines that will be called Stirling engines have a Stirling regenerator. What is a Stirling regenerator, though? 1. A regenerator is... okay, we could go through terms, but these terms are not super relevant, so we're just going to define a Stirling regenerator. Basically, I have a tube. Tube. It is filled with, there's either metal sheets, stacked on top of each other. Or sometimes you see like a wire mesh. Basically what this is for is if I have hot air coming in this end, and it's going to be cooled down here. This is your cold side. This is your hot side. The hot air is going to be cooled down anyways once it reaches the cold section. And if it does, then all that energy you put into the hot air gets lost because it got cooled down. So what instead we do is we put it through this regenerator, and right, obviously it's filled with this, and it tries to take as much heat as it can from the hot air and just hold on to it. Why are we holding on to just some heat energy? Because now we cooled down the air. The air is coming back, and it's going to be heated up here. Right? It's hot here. We are going to give energy to the air anyways. If the air is, let's say, I don't know, right back to that other example, you have 20 degrees here, and you have 100 degrees here. If my 20 degrees air needs to get all the way up to 100, that takes a lot of energy. So, we then run it back through the Stirling regenerator, which is still hot, and it transfers most of its energy to the cold air. Now the cold air is maybe at like 50 degrees. Now the gap from 50 degrees to 100 degrees is a lot smaller. Takes a lot less energy. So it regenerates energy that you put into it. There's a bunch of terms. You have regenerator, you have recuperator, economizer. Basically, these are all different ways to make machines more efficient by making, because they're gonna lose energy anyways. We want to make most of that energy, or the air is going to lose energy and gain energy anyways. We want to make most of that reversible. What that means is that if I have the hot air and it's going to become cold, if I make it just, this is 100, this is 20, right? If I make this 100 degree air 70 degrees, when it gets to this cold side, it won't have to lose as much energy. Some of that energy is reversible, or some of that energy transfer is reversible. And that's what all of the different systems do. There's a bunch of different ways to basically harvest energy, excess energy from waste products. The Stirling engine, even though it's called an engine, was designed to be a kind of recuperator, I believe, or something. It was designed to make machines more efficient, because if your machine was going to spew out a bunch of hot gas or hot liquid or something anyways, you might as well harvest the last bit of energy you can from it. Right, back to the Stirling engine. I have a bunch of notes. I probably took too many notes, but hopefully that makes it as easy to understand as possible. Okay, well, we're going to start the cycle here. The hot piston is just a little past, it's like bottom. It's just going up the cylinder. The cold air, or the cold piston, is almost at the bottom. So there's more air that's touching the hot side than the cold side. So the hot piston will expand, or the hot air will expand and push the hot piston up. Let me get to about here. The hot piston has a little bit more it can go, but it's almost at the end of its cycle. Now the cold piston starts moving up. When the cold piston starts moving up, it pulls on the air because this hot air is expanding at a very steady rate, and the hot piston is slowing down in its rate of expansion. The cold air gives a place for the hot air to go. So a bunch of hot air travels through the regenerator and through the tube and the regenerator to get to the cold side. Now we get all the way up to, about here. The hot piston is at its max now. It stops doing work. It can't do very much anymore. And now it starts to come back down. Now this air is touching the cold side and is getting colder and contracting. So when the hot piston comes back down and pushes the rest of the hot air through the regenerator, it doesn't take as much energy because the air is starting to compress. It already wants to be at a lower volume, so the hot air, or the hot piston pushing it through, is okay. It does take energy. Something you'll notice with Stirling engines and all of these engines is that they're only producing energy for like half the cycle, even less than half the cycle. For example, Stirling engines produce energy for 1/4 of their cycle. When the hot piston is expanding, that is the only place that they produce energy. The rest of the cycle is all about minimizing how much energy it takes to take that air that was hot and make it really cold so that it can be compressed and start at a much lower volume so that it can then expand. Because if your air is already at a high volume, it can't expand very much. So you want to put it at a low volume so that it can then go and expand. Cool. We are here. Where is it? This is right. One cold piston is now at its max. And then the cold piston starts to compress the cold gas, which takes less energy than was produced when the hot piston expanded because the air is colder and it already wants to be at a smaller volume, so it's easier to compress. So the cold piston comes down and it compresses the cold air a lot, right? We're starting here and we're ending here. This system now has the minimum volume that it's ever going to have. And to go from up here to here, the cold piston compresses it a lot. So it does use energy. All of these cycles use a good chunk of the energy that they make. Not all of the energy, obviously, then it wouldn't be doing anything. But it uses a solid amount of it. Then we're at, 3, we did this, the cold piston comes down. The hot piston is now at its bottom, and it's going to start coming back up in a second, which it does. And now we start back at, right, the cold piston is now, the system is at its minimum volume. The cold piston has compressed all of the air into a much smaller space so that it can do a lot of work on the hot piston once it starts heating up. And the hot piston starts coming up, right, from here to here. Some of the air is going back through all of the air is going back through the regenerator, right, up until here. There's air going through the regenerator, getting warmed up again, after being cooled down, and is now getting heated up by near the hot piston, and it'll expand the hot piston, right? We covered... Was that all of it? Yes, that is the entire cycle. Cool. When I was first researching this, I thought this was incredibly inefficient. And it's not the most efficient, but it's actually not that bad. Because the air gets cooled down so much, it is okay that you do have to compress air and you do have to do a lot of work on the air. But because of this, Stirling engines work best when there is a high temperature differential between the two. So if my hot area is at like 40 degrees and my cold area is at 30 degrees, I'm probably not going to get that much energy out of it. I probably lose energy even, unless I design it specifically to be a low differential Stirling engine. I think it's called a low heat differential, LHD. You'll find those like online on like Amazon and stuff that that you can put over like a coffee cup or something, where it's like there is technically hot air there and it is hot, but the difference is very small. Stirling engines work best with like a 500 degree Fahrenheit differential. That's when this cycle becomes pretty efficient overall. Yeah. So that's the Stirling Alpha. Now there's another one, the Stirling Beta. What? Oh. Oops. Stirling Beta, I should just keep this open. Is the same concept as a Stirling Alpha in a different shape. Now you have two pistons in the same tube. You have one piston. This is the big piston that, that has a seal against the tube. This is called the power piston. This smaller piston that isn't sealed to the tube, we'll call that the displacer piston. Right? It doesn't seal against the tube, but its job is to move the air around by just being there. For example, if the displacer piston goes all the way down here, it's now occupying a lot of this area, so a lot of that air has to go up and touch the cold side. And if the displacer piston is... Okay, for this you'll see, right, if the displacer piston is up here, then most of the air has to touch here, just because it's taking up space. Construction, right, you can see one piston, or one cylinder. You have the cold areas at the top and the hot areas at the bottom. You can invert them. If you do, you invert the rotation. So if the cold is at the bottom and the hot is at the top, then for example, you see, like, if I play this, the wheel is spinning this way. If you switch them, the wheel will spin the other way. Right, you have the power piston. This is what actually does the energy, harvests energy, and does work. This other piston is, like I said, just there to exist and just take up space. That's the displacer. Then, what do we have? Then between the two, sometimes you'll have an insulator so that they don't touch. It's called a heat insulator, so that the hot and cold aren't necessarily touching, because that would be inefficient. Sometimes you don't normally see any kind of Stirling regenerator on this type of engine, and this is one of the more common types for lower energy operations. Because the hot and cold are right next to each other, it can be easier to set up and more compact than the alpha. And then again, we see that this is your displacer. The displacer is 90 degrees ahead of the alpha. From the point of view that it's a little less clear, because for example, if you switch them, then the displacer would be 90 degrees behind the alpha. But the displacer piston... What? Oh, not that. The displacer piston needs to be such that when the cold piston is at its... or when the power piston is at its max, the displacer piston is halfway between... it is going between the hot and the cold. So for example, if you switch them, then the displacer piston would be going the other way when the power piston reaches its top. The displacer piston would be going this way, and right, if this was hot and this was cold, it would be also halfway between hot and cold. Right? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, frame 9. Okay. Currently, the cold section is more or less completely walled off. Very little air can touch the cold. So most of the air is touching the hot section. So it expands and passes around the displacer, because there's so much room around the displacer. It passes around it and pushes against the power piston. And so the power piston starts to go up. Now here, the power piston is nearing its max, kind of, and the displacer piston is starting to go down. So now the cold section is now all open again. Then it is 1. Now the cold section is very open, a lot of air can touch that, and the displacer is coming down and pushing some of this air from the hot section to the cold section, so it cools down. It becomes easier to compress, like we talked about with the other one. Again, there is no like suction in these engines. The power piston only produces energy on this half. And then frame 6, the power piston is coming down. It's starting to reach the bottom-ish section, and it closes off the cold area. So now air is mostly between them, but air can't really touch the cold area, and the displacer piston is starting to come up, and now we're back. Now a bunch of air is touching the hot section rather than the cold section, and it expands. There's the cycle. It isn't, again, like with the other one, it isn't perfectly efficient in the same way that, for example, you could if you were creating a vacuum underneath by lowering the temperature of the air below atmosphere. But most of these operate with the cold section at atmosphere and the hot section way above atmosphere. So it is all about making the air easier to compress. The displacer piston can kind of get pushed by the hot air a little bit, but because it is completely surrounded by the hot air, when here, how pressure works is that pressure will push on all sides, on all walls of the container. Right? The walls of the container are these the walls of the cylinder, the bottom of the power piston, and every side of the displacer piston. So the displacer piston doesn't actually get pushed too much, so it doesn't actually take that much energy from the hot air, because it can expand. It doesn't change the volume. The power piston changes the volume. Cool. That is a Stirling engine with the beta configuration. We have an ad, starts in 30 seconds. After that, we will get to our last engine, the Manson engine. The thing about Stirling engines is that they're all closed air. The air goes in a loop, it cycles, it's never supposed to leave. Manson engines are open air. They allow the atmosphere to help the engine process. Manson. We will look at how that is. Yep. In just a second after ads. Take this time during the ad break to get up, get a drink of water, go to the bathroom, stretch. All the good things. Take care of yourselves. Welcome back from ads, everyone. Ready to start on the next one. Well, thank you for supporting the channel. I always appreciate it. Seeing through the ads, all the money that comes from that goes straight back into making the channel better and, you know, improving content and stuff. Emotes, maybe an actual model, you know, in like a couple 100 years. They're so fucking expensive, Jesus Christ. At least the ones that aren't pre-made. To be fair, like, the pre-made ones are also really cool. So, I don't know. We'll see. Manson engine. There are a couple differences, again, because it isn't a closed air engine. The system doesn't have to deal really with cooling down the air all the way from being hot to being cold, or heating the air from being cold to being hot. Okay, kind of. I say that it doesn't have to worry about too much about the compression aspect of, like, compressing the super hot air by cooling it down. It doesn't have to worry about that because it just gets to steal air from the environment. Right, construction. I don't have a lot of notes about the construction because it's just hard to describe. You have many parts, but mainly you have this heater, and then you have a cooler. Same way as with our Stirling Beta configuration, you had the hot side here and the cold side here. I believe for this engine they can also be flipped, and the wheel will go in reverse. I think so, but don't quote me on that. And then you have your one piston. The important bit is that your displacer and your power piston are the same. What that means, though, is that there is a gap around your power piston. Your power piston is not stable. Or, not stable, what do you mean? It's not airtight. That's the word I'm looking for. It's not airtight. Air can go between the two. It has to. Even though it does obviously have access to the atmosphere, there does need to be some air moving around. And so, these engines tend to be relatively inefficient. For example, I do not know of any actual use of the Manson engine. As far as I know, like, let me see if I can find one. They're like desk toys more so than in. Right, sometimes you'll see like big ones. I haven't, as far as I know, there isn't any practical use. But then again, every once in a while you'll see like a really big one and be like, then what the fuck do you use that one for? There we go. Right. Small desk toy kind of thing. You don't use it for much. It's just kind of there and kind of cool to have around. Because it spins again, like we talked about with the Aeolipile. It spins pretty fast, but with low torque, which is again its downfall, and it's just so inefficient that you might as well. You would probably be better off using a Stirling Beta configuration if you were gonna do this, Because you already have everything for a Stirling Beta. You just need to modify the piston and add a second one. Anyways, there is a gap around your power piston, but unlike with our Stirling Beta, which is somewhere. Oh my god, stop. Scroll in. Unlike the Stirling Beta, the displacer piston does not have such a huge gap around it. It is a very small gap. And normally that wouldn't be very good at either displacing or power because there's not enough room that the air can easily flow by, and there's still a gap, so a lot of the power will end up just moving past. Even if it can't do it easily, it will. That's where the open airness comes in. Basically, there's a channel through the power piston and through the section here, like the connector piece, that connects once it reaches, this is called top dead center. Yeah, right here. Top dead center. It is not the top of the wheel, but it is called top dead center. It connects this channel, the hot air, to this port right here. Where this hot air, which has expanded and is continuing to expand, can just leave. So all of that pressure is instantly released, and it becomes a lot easier to compress it. When we go back, now even though there isn't very much room around the around our piston, it's still easier to displace because there isn't that much pressure. So it displaces kind of easily. And then, once we get to, this is called bottom dead center. Again, not the bottom of the wheel, that's the way things are named. This port connects, this is your cold air right here. Right, that's where all of this went. It went around the sides and hit this cold section. This cold section has now cooled down the air, and now there's a vacuum. So it takes in a bunch of air that helps make it not a vacuum anymore. And that lets it move the air back to the hot space. There was... Oh, right, yes, yeah. The other thing is that once you get to about here, the average internal pressure drops below atmosphere because we released a bunch of air. It's not closed, so now we lost a bunch of air. And so as that air starts to cool down, we drop below internal pressure. And this pushes the piston forward. You might think, how does that make any sense? The vacuum is on this side. And the piston is over here. Why does it push the piston forwards? If anything, it should push the piston backwards into the vacuum. But that's not how pressure works. Because the average internal pressure is lower than atmosphere, the atmosphere pushes in on all parts, right? That's how pressure works. But it gets to push in on this section of the piston harder than the internal pressure pushes out. So the piston actually gets pushed by the atmosphere to bottom dead center. Or right from here. Right, the atmosphere starts pushing about here, like between these two. and it'll push it all the way to bottom dead center. And then the cycle restarts. Then the pin... Yeah, obviously. Yeah. Words. The piston expands, or goes back because the momentum of the wheel leaves a bunch of hot area exposed. A bunch of the air from this cold side moves towards the hot side. It gets heated up and pushes the piston until you reach top dead center. Is there anything else? Again, with this system, you only get energy from half the cycle, right? You only get energy from the cycle once from this phase, when we're going back, or wait, not this phase, from this phase, when the hot air starts pushing on the piston harder than this air pushes back. So if this is really hot, that'll happen really fast. But then this cold will need to be really cold to compensate, and that actually probably makes it better. Basically, big temperature differential is always better for all of these engines. It's this thing called the... Let me see if I can find it. Wikipedia thermodynamics. I didn't spell that right. This one. It's called the Carnot efficiency, which is the... Here, let me move this all the way over here. The Carnot cycle is... Right, Carnot was a French physicist, Sadi Carnot, and he devised essentially the way that all heat engines have to work. Engines that take advantage of heat differential to do work. One, there is a maximum efficiency, which is called the Carnot efficiency. The Carnot efficiency is... Carnot. Let's see. It is hot. Right, it is 1 minus hot temperature in Kelvin. All of these temperatures are in Kelvin. Other way. Yes, other way. Backwards. So this is the cold temperature over the hot temperature. If the cold were ever to be 0, so if this were to be 0 Kelvin, if 0 100% efficient. This is the maximum efficiency. Not practical, obviously. There is no machine that can ever have a 100% efficiency. Entropy and shit. Basically, entropy is like a system cannot remain unless a system is completely closed off. It will always lose energy to the environment. In this case, for example, Earth will not remain, for example, you know how the inside of the Earth is hot? That will not keep happening forever. It will cool down. The Earth cannot rotate forever because it will eventually come to a stop. Eventually. That's a long, long way out. The Moon cannot stay in orbit of Earth. Nothing can stay in orbit forever. It has to either come down to the thing that it's orbiting or leave. The Moon is leaving into space. It's escaping. Again, this is all entropy, and entropy says that there is no such thing as 100% efficiency. You can't do that. But this is talking about the maximum efficiency if you ignore entropy. And this is what makes heat engines... heat engines are very simple. You have heat, you have some pistons, you have some air, and you just let it go. They're very simple designs, but they cannot get a super high efficiency. Because if this cold is, let's say, 100, and this hot, let's say this is red, it's 100, and this is 300, your maximum efficiency is 66%. No matter how good of an engine you build, you can never get above 66% if you have this kind of ratio between your hot and cold. And that governs all of hot engines, heat engines. The Carnot cycle is basically the thing that we talked about. It is the perfect thermodynamic cycle that a perfect engine, it's called the Carnot heat engine because he made it, but he didn't invent it because it doesn't exist. It is just theoretically the perfect engine, and it would follow this. So, ideally, you would perform isothermal expansion, which means... Okay, so heat, pressure, and volume are all related. These things called the gas laws. Gas laws. The most common ones that most people learn in high school are the ideal gas laws, because they govern the basics. For most relatively normal operations, you can estimate what your gas will do using this ideal gas law. Basically, it says the pressure times the volume is the... Is it amount? Yeah, it is. Okay. Is the amount of the substance. I believe this is in molecules or something. This is a... Yeah, so this is in moles. N is in moles. Yes, I remember this. I learned this. Right, pressure, volume, and temperature. This is your amount of the stuff that you have in moles. And this is your ideal gas constant, which... which is, I think, the... kind of just... Is this... I forget, is this a number, or is it... a... value that's different for each material? I forget. I think it's just a constant. There's a bunch of fancy science you can do, but basically... And these are just if you have a certain amount of stuff, and your pressure... If your pressure goes up and your volume remains the same, then your temperature needs to go up. If your temperature goes up and your volume remains the same, then your pressure needs to go up. Now, why are we explaining this? Because the first step in a Carnot cycle is this thing called isothermal expansion. What this means is that you take heat from a reservoir, your hot side, or your hot cylinder, and you transfer that heat into the air, or to a gas, and you do this while you have an expansion, so that your volume can go up while your temperature goes up, so your temperature actually remains the same for the entire cycle. Well, pressure goes up and then volume goes up to reduce pressure. And while doing all of this, in the ideal cycle, the gas doesn't actually increase in temperature. Right? That's what it is? Yeah, that's what isothermal is. You keep the same temperature while having a volume expansion so you can push on the cylinder. Second step is wait. Oh. So you have a so the gas expands, it takes up more volume, and that expansion pushes on this cylinder to do work. Okay. Or pushes on something to do work. Then heat is transferred reversibly, meaning that heat can then be regained, so you can get the maximum amount of efficiency out of the temperatures, or the temperature differential. The gas then moves to the low temperature reservoir and loses all of its heat except for a tiny, tiny bit. And then it gets compressed while losing heat energy that comes from that compression to the environment. Right? Like it says, the gas temperature is infinitesimally higher than the temperature of your cold reservoir. So that there is heat transfer, because there has to be heat transfer, otherwise you're just making energy. But it is so small that the temperature still remains the same. Essentially. A lot of this is confusing. Basically, it gets colder, it shrinks, and then it gets compressed back into the same size that it was at the beginning of the cycle, and the cycle gets started again. This is a Carnot cycle. It is not practical, it cannot happen. But that governs all of the hot air efficiency. And right, the Carnot efficiency was this 1 minus cold over hot. And that's the reason that even like some of the more advanced heat engines can't directly get that high of an actual efficiency because they're governed by this efficiency. You know what's more efficient than that? Blowing shit up. That's a combustion engine. We aren't doing that today, probably. Fuck. Let me see. We did Manson. Alright. The last thing we have for today is the low pressure steam engine. There are a couple different types of steam engines. I only got to the low pressure steam engines, which is towards the beginning of, their history. But this is still really cool. You wouldn't see any of these in like steam engines and like trains and stuff. Those are all high pressure, because you can do so much more work with more pressure. But understanding where we started is, again, always even if not like directly important, then you can see why they are built the way it is. So your first real example of steam pushing stuff is no, not this. We talked about, right, Archytas and his bird. Bird. The thing that's like basically a bird. Like not really a bird. It's just kind of a bird. Right, this would be filled with steam, and it would propel itself, or it would be filled with like water, and then be put over like a fire, and then it would propel itself after the water turned into steam. Yep. The next example we have is the Aeolipile. The next like major example. Aeolipile. Right? Like we covered at the beginning of stream. Also uses steam to spin in a circle. Great. That's all history we've already covered. Ooh. Then, we skip ahead all the way to the 15th century. Leonardo da Vinci he's called an Italian polymath. Basically, that means he knows a lot about a lot of different things. That's essentially what being a polymath is. He devised a cannon. He didn't build it. It was just found in his notes. Called the Architonere. I said that right. It's hard to see, so I'm probably gonna draw a shitty drawing of it. So you have your big cannon barrel, or your cannon like main part. Then you have your cannon barrel, and then you have this. Essentially, this would be filled. Then you would have a boiler somewhere over here. This would be filled with water and put over a fire. The water would then heat up. And right now, there's a valve. This valve is open. Normally it would waste a lot of water. But that's like not a lot of water, because you aren't heating it up to like boiling temperatures. You're just heating it up till it becomes like pretty hot. Then you have this. Then you would have a pipe like this. And this is, obviously you have a valve here. This is closed. And then you would have another like fire. That's a shitty fire. Fire. And that would heat up your cannon barrel. Or your cannon body, not the barrel. Obviously you have cannonballs. You put a cannonball in, you aim it, and you're ready to fire. You close this valve, wait for a couple of seconds to maybe a couple of minutes. Then you open this. Right, this is closed. So now a bunch of steam pressure builds up in here, and then when you open this, it pushes a bunch of very, very hot water into a cannon. This cannon is kept much hotter than the boiler. The cannon is red hot. or it would be. I don't know if any of these have ever been built. I didn't see anything like it's ever been built. It just said that he devised it in his, or like it was found in his notes. It would get really hot. The water would touch the cannon, and it would do something called flash boiling, where it just instantly vaporizes, becomes a lot of very powerful gas really fast, or powerful, a lot of high pressure gas very fast, and it would shoot the cannonball out of the cannon. Like I said, I don't think any of them have ever been built. Maybe like now, someone like trying, someone who wants to like, who wanted to like build it just for the shits, shits and giggles. But I don't think they built any back then. I didn't see anything like that. It just, like I said, it was found in his notes. So I assume if it was found in his notes, then we didn't find it somewhere else. Okay. That's all for Leonardo da Vinci. We have a guy named Taqi al-Din. He is an Ottoman polymath. And he devised a device that would take a spit, like one of these. You would put like a wheel on it, and your wheel would have like kind of like paddles, kind of like a water wheel. You have paddles, and then you would shoot a jet of stream out to spin the paddles. This is in 1551. In 1648, John Wilkins, who was an English philosopher, described something very similar, or English natural philosopher. Basically, that's like before they had like really like science. A natural philosopher is someone who thinks about the natural stuff. Yeah. So he just scientist. Write that. Scientist. So he described it in 1551. He described it in 1648. I could not find anything of them actually being built, but they might have. It seems like a relatively simple concept to actually just build. Right, 1663. Edward Somerset. He is an English inventor. He published a book. Published a book of 100 inventions. And of those, there was one that described a method of, I have a building, I have stories on the building, and here's my ground floor. I have a water tank here, I need to get water up to the top of the building. How do I do that? Well, I could carry the water up the stairs, but that's boring. I own a building. So, this is for, like, royalty and stuff, I assume, or, like, nobility stuff. I could have people carry the water, but, like, what if I wanted a different way to do it? So you have a boiler with water. You take the water, you have a fire, it heats up the water, and it turns into steam. Now I have a tank of water here, and what the steam does is that now that there's such a pressure inside of the boiler, it pushes down on the water in my tank. This forces the water up, all the way up to the top. Or, more generally, it would force the water up one level, and then you would have another similar machine to force the water up a second level. Because this is very similar to, if you know what a coffee percolator is, I had to search up what that was. But it's basically the same. You have a thing here. You have your kind of like grounds and whatever. But then you drip water down, and then the water has to go up, and you keep cycling the water. That's a horrible drawing. But you want to keep cycling the water so that you get a really strong coffee. And really easy way you can do this is by just heating up the water so that some steam pressure forces water up to the top. So it's very similar to how that works. The problem is that it's also very weak. You need to have a really high pressure of steam to push water up much more than a short distance. So you would need like strong materials to withstand such pressure. And it would take a while because you need to heat up the boiler that had the steam so that it could push the water. A bunch of things. He didn't get any funding. It didn't go anywhere. Oh shit! Actually, before you, I forgot one. Geronimo. I'm pretty sure this is Spanish. So Geronimo. De Ions. Bo. I don't know how to say that. I guess Beaumont? That's how I would say it in English. He designed a water pump. You have... because they had a bunch of mines that had flooded. So whatever, you have your, like, tunnel here. You have a bunch of water here. And now you need to pump all of this water up. All the way to the surface. Right? So he invented a pump that would use steam to push water up a very thin pipe. Now, normally I would give you an explanation of how this works and like diagrams and stuff. I could not find shit on this one. There were things that were in Spanish, but those were more news articles than actual like descriptions of how it works. I have seen very little actual like the engineering of how it's supposed to work. So as far as I know, from what I understand, you have steam and you use it to push water up a pipe. Kind of the same concept as the coffee percolator, but don't take my word for it. I don't actually know if that's how that works. Okay, right. This was 1606. This is before the Edward Somerset. Next guy. We got 1679. 1679. Dennis Papin. He is a French physicist. That's not how you spell that word. Wait, never mind. That is. I'm a genius. Physicist. What he did was he made this thing called the steam digester. Basically, it's a pressure cooker. You have a pot, you have water, you have your fire, and you have a valve. Basically, it was kind of like a pressure plate almost. Obviously, everyone could do this. You could just take a pot and you could close it. The problem is that the water would not stop boiling when the pressure reached where, your materials couldn't handle it anymore. It would continue to boil and continue to build up pressure, and then the thing would explode. I like explosions, but explosions are dangerous. So, what he did was there was a kind of like a lid pressure plate thing, kind of like a piston, but not really the same purpose, but like a piston. It would seal the top airtight, and then there was a weight on top. That weight would be specifically calibrated to how much pressure that vessel could handle. So when the weight lifted a certain amount, it would be, I didn't actually get to see like a diagram, but it would be, I would assume it's connected to something like this, where if the weight goes up, this comes down and it flips the valve open until the weight goes back down. So it regulated itself so that the pressure plate didn't, or so that the thing didn't explode. Because like I said, explosions are cool. But if you're trying to do something and you put a pressure cooker inside your house and then it blows up your kitchen, less cool. Okay. That was Dennis Papin. $16.98. 1698. We get a Thomas Savery, who was an English inventor / my god, I know how to write, I swear. Inventor / engineer, and he created the Savory engine. Can you guess why it's called that? So, it is definitely one of the more complicated things. So we're going to go over this later when we talk about the different types of engines and how they work. Or different types of steam engines and how they work, and, you know, all that stuff. Basically what I'm going to say is it took steam and said, well, yeah, it can be used for pushing and pulling. So that's what the Savory engine does. And it was sort of a revolution in like these kind of like pumps and stuff. And because one, it was so important, and two, because I think it's cool, we're gonna go over that later. 1712, we're almost at the end of this history. You got Thomas Newcomen, who was also an English inventor. And he invented the Newcomen engine. Wow. Newcomen engine, which is a completely different concept, because now we're back to pistons. The Newcomen, right? The Savory engine doesn't use pistons. The Newcomen engine uses pistons. And it was really, really useful because the Savory engine, because of how it works, we'll go over that, needs to be placed next to the water. And the Savory engine could get about 40 feet of pumping distance. It could pump water up about 40 feet. So if your mine was, I don't know, 120 feet down, you needed 3 Savory engines at 3 different steps around the mine. And so you needed to make the steps and build the steps and stuff. And also, because of how the Savory engine worked, you needed high-ish pressure steam, and the materials couldn't handle that, so his engines kind of exploded. Still revolutionary, but the Newcomen engine said that it could do pumping better, and it did. So there were a lot of Newcomen engines. I know the fuck all about history. I think this is the start of the Industrial Revolution, is about here. We won't get the main engine of the Industrial Revolution, or like the steam Industrial Revolution, until later, 1781. But in 1759, we get a guy named James Watt. James Watt is a Scottish inventor. Who we named the Watt after. And he looked at the Newcomen engine and said that it was really inefficient, so he made it better. Basically, the Newcomen engine had some inefficiencies because some aspects of the design were made to be simple rather than efficient, and or some of the aspects that were on the simpler side could be made to be more complex to gain. He said 80% efficiency, or like it was like 80% inefficient, so I don't know, it was 80% of the steam is going to waste, so, and he said he could get most of that back. So that's how he designed his improvements. It wasn't actually a new engine. It was he sold add-ons, like extensions for if you already had a Newcomen engine, you just buy your watt add-ons, and they make your existing engine better with very little changing. You don't need to like tear down the engine that you already have. You don't need to like modify the structure too much. So that was very smart on his part, because everyone already had one, and he just sold extensions that made it more efficient and faster, because with these kind of engines, more efficiency is faster. I think with most engines, more efficiency is faster. I guess until you get like modulated fuel intake and stuff. That's not now. Combustion engines, we aren't getting there. But we have, right? So we have it was called the Watt engine. It was not a separate engine. It was, well, this one isn't really called the Watt engine. This is more called the, this was more of his, like, add-ons, but some people did end up calling it the Watt engine. The Watt engine is this next thing we're talking about, because then in 1981, James Watt made his own engine, or 1981. He invented what he called the double acting engine. What this was is basically the Newcomen engine. You have a piston, and it only acts by pulling the, right, you have your like tube and stuff, the piston. The Newcomen engine only pulls the piston down, and then the piston goes up because of gravity. Well, because it was pumping stuff, there would be like water and weight on the other end that would pull it down, and then it would pull a beam, one side of a beam down, and if one side of the beam went down, the other side of the beam would go up, so the piston would go up. So gravity pulled the piston up. Because of that, you only get energy out of one stroke. He said, what if we did it out of two? Also, one part of it, okay, there were two parts. One, you can't do double acting if you have what's called, what? Oh, that's my bad. You can't, if you have a beam engine, which is, and this is connected to your piston, and then this is, because this only goes up and down. It doesn't rotate in a circle. A double acting engine is very literally pointless. Well, not entirely pointless, but you don't really need to push the water down. The water is going to drag the engine down on its own. But because the Newcomen engine needed to be built like that, because it was slow and unstable, so the power wasn't always super even, and so it needed to be built like that so that it didn't, you didn't have like a wheel that was turning and then had to be stopped and then turning and then stopped, and that would be inefficient. So they built it like that. With Watt's improvements, they could now attach their piston directly to a circle. And now you get the same kind of framework as the other engines that we've covered. You have it directly attached to the circle, and now it can move the circle. And now it would be really cool if I could push down on this side and then also push up on this side. So when it gets to the bottom, I push up, and then when it gets to the top, I push down. So he invented this thing called the double acting engine, which did exactly that with steam. And you'll see essentially that same idea, those same ideas and technology on steam engines, even like some of the newest steam engines. Obviously they aren't, I don't think they're coming out anymore. FBI, open up! Jesus Christ. Hi Dino, thank you for the raid. Oh fuck. Dino Nugget delivery. I don't know about problem, but yeah, thank you for the raid. Holy shit, the chat. What do we got? Hi Loris, Jeff, Salmon, Red, Arani, Eve. Goddamn. Thank you so much for the raid. I really appreciate it. How was stream? Stream was good. Lots of fun as always. Nice, nice. How's Science Sunday going? Science Sunday is going pretty good. We're towards the tail end. We have a couple more engines. Right now we're talking about steam engines. Like some steam engines. Because there's so many designs, so we're talking about like a couple of the earlier steam engines. I think that was actually just the end of history, of the history part. Basically, I think it'll be easier if I just explain it when I'm explaining the engines. So we'll go do that. Thank you for the stretch, Loris. No. Engines, what do we got? We got the Savory engine first. Oh fuck, also we have ads. Okay. We'll wait for the ads to come back. For the ads to finish, and then we'll go over this engine. Thank you for the hydrate, Dino. Thank you everyone for sticking through the ads. It helps support me. All money that comes from ads goes back into the channel. Emotes, maybe a model in like a century or something. But yeah. Also, Raiders, I forgot to mention this, I think, before the ads, because I think you rated in literally right as the ads started. If you need to go rest, take care of yourselves, drink water, just get up, move around and stretch. Please go do that. Take care of yourselves. You are important. Now, where are we? Yes. Dino? What? Since you're not busy? How do we want to do? Yes, I have. Oh, for the hydrate. Sorry, I was looking through the chat to try to catch up. What we got? Okay. This is the savory engine or the savory pump. I guess like the main design features are you have a boiler here, water, fire, creates steam. Then you have a secondary compartment which has some water from the, this is where your water would like come from. So this is would be like the end of the, like the flooded mines or something. That water would be in this pipe, and that water would be in here. The steam goes into this chamber too. Now this pipe is all the way up. This is where you want the water to go. And this pipe is for one of the biggest features of the savory pump. It's that it uses both the fact that steam, when it gets cold, it condenses and becomes takes up much less volume. And so it can perform a kind of like sucking action on the water. And if it expands, it can push the water. That seems like you just do the same thing twice, which is why you have these 4 things. These are valves. And this is what makes this entire design work. We break it up into 2 phases. We have a suction phase and a pusher phase. During the suction phase, this compartment is filled with steam that is hot at the start. There's water at the bottom, and the A valve is closed. The C valve is also closed. The D valve and the B valve are open. During this phase, we want a lot of that steam that's in the compartment to become smaller, and we do that by cooling it down. We already have a bunch of water that's right here, so we might as well just pour some of the water that's already in the pipes on top of the compartment to help it cool down. That's what this is for. This takes some of that water that's from the pipe and pours it on top of here. Then you have the A valve is closed because you don't want more steam to come into the compartment, and you have to deal with like more steam and compressing more of it. You want the volume to be fixed so that when you cool it down, the volume has to shrink. It can't just pull more steam from over here. So if the volume of steam shrinks, then there's a vacuum in the compartment, empty space that needs to be filled. And because the C valve is closed, that water can't come from the top, so it has to be pulled up from the bottom through this pipe and then into the compartment. Now that phase will finish, and then the valves will be flipped, exactly. The D valve will close, the B valve will close, and the C valve and the A valve will open. So that now there is just air in here. So if we fill it with a lot more steam, that will push down on the water. Because the C valve is open, that water can't go back down, it has to go up. So it gets pushed all the way up, and eventually it makes it out the top. Hopefully that makes sense. There are no pistons, no moving parts besides the valves, so the main force isn't being taken by anything moving, which used to be a very, even today it's still a big part of maintenance, that things that are moving and then you start hitting them with water, air, whatever, they break down a lot easier than just a stationary pipe. So that's one of the benefits of this design. Some details. Like I said, the Savory pump could pump about water from, was it 10 feet below it to 30 feet above it, so it can, there's a little bit of wiggle room for that, but it had a maximum pump distance of 40 feet up, which is pretty good. But then you have issues like the Savory pump, unlike some of the other pumps that'll come later, it needs to be placed right next to the water. So if I have a mine that is, let's say, I don't know, that's bad, whatever. It's 120 feet deep. I don't know, let's say 100 to round it. 100 feet. And it's flooded. I need to place a Savory pump here to pull the water up and bring it up to here, where I need to put a ledge for the water to be, so I can then pull it up with another Savory pump that's up here. Okay, my drawing skills suck too much for this. But you need to put a Savory pump there, and then there. That's 3 pumps, 3 different ledges that you need to fully build out the ledges, so that, because these weren't light, they were relatively heavy, and that's hard and expensive, so that wasn't great. The other thing is that the Savory pump deals with relatively high pressure steam. If that steam got too high pressure, the materials couldn't handle it and they would just give way. So I think a couple years after it was after he invented it and showed it off to everybody, some people were using it to pump a mine, and then one of the Savory pumps exploded. With the Savory pump, I believe by that point it was automatic, so you didn't need a person to turn the valves. Maybe? But at one point you would have needed an actual person to turn the valves right there. And if it exploded, that would be really bad. And even if there isn't a person there, if it explodes, you lose an entire machine. So those were all not great qualities, but it was, at that point, the best option. Then, our next engine is the Newcomen engine. Where is it? Newcomen. Pause. There. The Newcomen engine solves basically all of these problems. Okay, let's see if we can line up. Okay, we start here. we'll call this the steam valve, and we'll call this the water valve. You have a boiler, water produces steam. The steam doesn't push up because of how this works. It doesn't produce high pressure steam. So the steam just fills the container as the piston gets pulled up by whatever's on this side pulling this down. Right, you have the beam, this side of the beam goes down, this side of the beam goes up, the piston goes up. The piston gets to go up because it can be filled with steam. And at the top, this valve closes. And the water valve will open for just a second to spray in some water into the hot steam. That causes the steam to cool down and compress, like we saw with the Savory engine. But now instead of working on water, we work on a piston. So now as that steam condenses and becomes smaller, it takes up less volume and it pulls down on the piston. So it's a relatively simple design, which is probably why it had such high adoption. I think at the peak there were like 1,000 of these across the UK, or across England. Maybe it was across Europe. I think it was just across England. Yeah, so it was really simple. There was no high pressure steam. And because this, like, arm, whatever is attached to here can extend down as far as it needs to, you could put all of your Newcomen engines at the top of the mine. And just have the trailing, like, arm go down to where you needed it. That was definitely a benefit. Probably one of the biggest benefits. Because building out full ledges is expensive. And then, like I said, simple, more moving parts, but that's probably wasn't the main downside. There were two big downsides. One, it was incredibly inefficient. Some people who did the actual math said it was somewhere around 1% efficiency, which is horrible. So that, you know, this was done normally with like coal and stuff. That could get expensive. But again, it was the best option at the time. The other thing is that the power from the piston was not always super consistent. Like, for example, this couldn't be attached to a wheel because the piston would have, like, it would kind of get to the end right here and then just kind of stop for a little bit, and then it would get to the top and then kind of stop for a little bit. That's not great for if you're going to attach it to a wheel, which is why it was attached like this with all of these chains, because once you get to like the top, it can just kind of sit here for as long as it needs to start compressing again, and then it can come back down, and then it can sit at the bottom. There's no, like, the wheel, like, because there's nothing spinning, there's nothing that needs to happen, like, in time. It was okay to do it this way. But obviously, you can't do everything like this. This is, like, pumping liquids out of the ground is one of the only things that this is really useful for. For example, you see this on, like sometimes you see it in, like, games and stuff as, like, your standard, like, oil pump. Why? Because it's really good at this, and if you don't need a full pump, that, especially if you don't want to get, like, blades and, like, rotors and stuff, even, like, today, if you don't want to get those coated with, for example, oil, this way works pretty well. Obviously, it's not powered by a steam engine anymore. It's powered by a full, like, Probably diesel, gas engine, something. But yeah, so in this diagram it doesn't show it, but usually all of these reservoirs would be connected and the same. So that you only had to put water in one place and it would just solve all the water problems for the engine. Right? Like we were talking about when we were talking about history, we said that James Watt had an idea because he said this was super inefficient, which it was, and he said that part of that was because a lot of this steam was wasted. That was because when the water happens, it doesn't just cool down the steam, it also cools down the cylinder that the piston is in. And when that gets cooled down, once you get all the way to the bottom, it won't start going up again, or it doesn't want to kind of accept that steam until it gets hot enough that the steam can stay around. Because if it keeps cooling down the steam will keep condensing, and we don't want that. We want all of the steam from the boiler to immediately enter the cylinder, so that we get as much steam in there as possible to then compress. Because the more steam there is, the more air is going to, or the more stuff is going to compress, and the stronger the vacuum is going to be. So James Watt said, okay, we're gonna draw like a shitty version of that. We got beam, circle. You have your thing at the bottom. This is your pump. So this is connected to your piston, and this is still connected to the boiler. You still have this, you still have the knob. Boiler, water, fire. But instead of this being connected to water, so that water would be sprayed in here, there is a separate cylinder that has a bunch of like water around it and is very cold. And this is called the condenser, because it condensed the steam separate from the main cylinder. So the main cylinder could stay hot. Basically what would happen is, like, if you had a bunch of steam in here, some of that steam would enter here, and then it would become cold and take up less volume. So now you have a little bit here. And because it took up less volume, it would create a small vacuum that would pull more steam into the condenser, that would create another small vacuum that would pull more steam, and that would keep happening until almost all the steam was condensed inside of the condenser and didn't make the hot cylinder cold. The other idea that he had was, well, I mean, the boiler is going to keep producing steam even when we're on the downstroke, or the power stroke, when we're pulling the piston down. It would be more efficient if, instead of atmospheric pressure up here, we put steam up here. Because steam is higher pressure than the atmosphere. Not that much, so it isn't like high pressure. It is like 7 psi above atmosphere. So nothing too crazy, but when this was coming down, this valve is closed, so this valve would open, and steam would be allowed from here above the piston, so that it could push down on the piston when you created the vacuum in here. These were the two big innovations that he made with the Newcomen engine. And then, like I said, because there aren't that many modifications here, this is basically just a standard Newcomen with a couple of bits added on. So he sold it as an add-on and an extension that you can just add to the already existing engines. You don't need to take them down. You don't need to sell them. You already have them. You just make it better. So this made it more efficient, faster. The other thing, like, that was part of his patent, I believe, was he made this like cylinder, and the meshing between the cylinder and the piston a lot better and a lot smoother. So one, it was more airtight just by default, and two, it produced more even power because it wouldn't stop at the bottom for that long, and it wouldn't stop at the top for that long. Or, like, not stop at the... Well, yeah, it wouldn't, like, have, like, breaks and stuff where there's more energy and then there's less energy. And then there's more energy. You wouldn't have any of that. So, they created what's called the rotary engine. It's just a wheel attached to a Newcomen engine that they modified. Right? It's attached here. You have your same, like, whatever, everything around here is just the piston attached to the wheel. Which was cool, because now you can use rotary energy for almost anything. And then, because he made that, he was able to make this thing called the double acting engine, which is the standard for, like, most, like, steam engines that you, like, a lot of the, like, more modern steam engines, like, the one that I saw a lot, because it's, like, the most complex and most advanced, was the Onion Pacific. I always called it that because I didn't know any better. Union Pacific, I believe it was called the Big Boy. And it would have used something like this, because this produces so much more power, because you get 2 strokes, but Watt was really opposed to high pressure steam usage in engines because it was dangerous, and he didn't believe that the materials at the time could handle it. So obviously, when the Union Pacific ran, it would have used a extremely high pressure variant of this, but it's all the same concept, so it doesn't matter. No, not that. Okay. So we start here. There is steam. It says high pressure steam. Ignore that. It's just steam. You get steam in here. The steam starts building up here. It pushes in on this side of the piston. This piston starts moving, and this other air that's here is connected to the exhaust, so it just gets to be pushed out. There's no compression, nothing. It's a lot cheaper than having to compress air and recycle it. You just let it be free. So the exhaust air goes out, and then the engine can finish this stroke, and then it switches. It's not quite like a switch, because they would be connected to a wheel. I just couldn't find a good one where they depicted that. But it would be connected to a wheel where, like we talked about, if we have one wheel, like this, cool, this this is like exaggerated, but kind of like this, and then you had your exhaust. This is called a what was it? Steam chest. This would be connected to your wheel, and then your piston would be connected to your wheel. This would be connected to your wheel. But the piston was connected to the wheel. It was, I believe, 90 degrees behind the steam chest. Right? The wheel is turning this way. So the steam chest, it would be flipped. Eraser, not that big. So the steam chest would be over the other two. Basically, it encloses these two together so that the steam can't go in any of these, and these two are connected. Because otherwise they wouldn't be connected. And this would be connected like this, so that this is about halfway between the two. There's enough leeway in the steam chest that just being halfway would be enough to connect, or being a little bit above halfway would be enough to connect these two together. So now this is connected to exhaust, and this, and the steam chest can operate on its own. It's not like a switch, because that's hard. Doing it, just having the wheels do it, it's a lot easier, because then you can just program in the timing based on where you put it on the wheels, versus having some complex, like, you could engineer a mechanism that would have it just like switch between the two whenever the wheel reached a certain point, but that would just be inefficient. The less energy you use, the better. This was good enough. Anyways, back to this, right? Now you get steam in here. Now this, all of the steam that was here, now gets to be vented out, and then it moves back, and then this would just be a cycle. It would be on a wheel, so it could provide rotary power, and it was very smooth, but you get 2 power strokes per cycle, which is much, it's about double the energy in theory, but it's less about double the energy. It's more about it being more smooth, because the more energy you can apply to the wheel for longer, the smoother the rotation is going to be. And if the rotation is smoother, you can do more with smooth rotation than you can with like really like jerky kind of unstable rotation. Yeah, and then this was invented because he could connect the things to the wheel, and so then now you get more efficiency, or a smoother wheel turning. And I think that is every engine that I have for today. This is probably part 1 of either 2 or 3. We'll see. Because we still have high pressure steam engines. That's probably not going to be too long, because they're mostly a similar design to the ones that we already talked about. So there's probably not too much there. Then there's the combustion engine, and then jet and rocket engines, or jet engines, and then we might talk about rocket engines if we have time, or if I have time to research it more. But yeah, I think that is it for Science Sunday. How much time do I have? Okay. I did think this was going to be much shorter than like the last one. But so I planned to, like, if we finished early, we'd play a game, probably like Hardspace Shipbreaker. I started playing that yesterday and I really enjoy it. But I also have stuff I need to do. So that's probably going to be it for today's stream. See if I can find someone to raid. But while I'm doing that, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Dano, thank you for the science. Thank you for listening in. And again, thank you for the raid. I really appreciate it. Right, we do, if you're new here, we do coding, we play games, and then we do Science Sunday every 2 to 3 Sundays. It's a little uneven, but the plan is 2 Sundays, maybe 3 Sundays. So next Science Sunday is what? Calendar. What do we got? That's one. The 8th, February 8th, I think. Hopefully. Right, then we'll be covering the rest of the engines that we didn't get to today. Combustion engine, jet engine, maybe rocket engine. Right, so... I have a Discord if you want to get updates on like Science Sunday and stuff, but also just like general schedule updates, live alerts. I post VODs on YouTube. This will be up on YouTube probably by today, maybe tomorrow. Yeah, if you like what you saw and you want to see more, you can always drop a follow. I really appreciate it. And yeah, let's. I know who I'm gonna raid. I'm gonna see if I can. I remember how to do this. Cool. Yeah. Okay. It's the raid message if you aren't subscribed. There's the raid message if you are. That should look like that. Again, thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate it. Remember to take care of yourselves. Dying is, in fact, bad for your health. And I will see y'all next time. Bye.